Ladies and gentlemen, I welcome you to another episode of Geopolitics East and West with T.A. Mullis and myself, Adil Raja. And today is 4th of March 2026, and we'll welcome Theo. And Theo, if you remember, last time in the last program of the same series, we discussed in detail. And in fact, I was particularly interested because you have got a very extensive experience in covering the war in Ukraine, and you've been there on ground multiple times, and you've seen the Shahed drones in action, basically an Iranian drone being used by the Russian forces against Ukraine, and Russia definitely have got extensive experience there. But I asked you that what role is it going to play in the current war? And obviously the war is definitely not resulting in the way we thought it would result. It is, it is escalating, and the escalation ladder, which is definitely a trap for the US and Israel and for the Gulf countries, is quite visible now, and it is definitely an ongoing situation. But talking about the Shahed drones, you see, Theo, right now, the Jerusalem Post reported that US revealed its own new suicide drone, taking a page out of Iran's playbook. All right, and the new drones are called LUCAS, an acronym for Low Cost Unmanned Combat Attack System, LUCAS drone. Now, the problem over here is what they're learning the hard way is that, as you can see over here, that you see the Iran's Guardian has reported that Iran's Shahed drones have brought terror to Ukrainian skies. Now they are being deployed in the Middle East, right? And of course, LUCAS drones are being built in response by the Americans, and they are being deployed. Interestingly, President Zelensky says that Ukraine has most extensive experience countering Shahed drones. That's what he's saying, right? And he's obviously asking that if the Gulf countries, they arrange a ceasefire with Russia, they can provide their expertise in countering these Shahed drones. So Shahed drones have definitely become a major factor in this war, as it is quite evident, because a Shahed drone takes around $25,000 to $50,000 per drone. Interceptor missile is $4 million a piece. To take down one
Plus.
Shahed drone, you have to fire at least two interceptors. Now, all right, even if you fire one, it is $50,000 versus $4 million US. The math speaks for itself. So, how effective do you think are Iran utilizing these Shahed drones? And they've already displayed that they have got huge numbers, hundreds of thousands of these drones, if not hundreds of thousands, but they've got thousands of these drones, while the interceptor missile supply is very quickly depleting, especially in the allied countries in the Gulf. So how do you analyze the situation now after this very brief but detailed analysis and explanation? Theo, over to you.
So the Shahed drones are doing what they are designed to do. They are just as much a military weapon, a terror weapon in some ways, as an economic weapon. If you fire a Shahed drone at your enemy and they shoot it down, you said 4 million. I think a Patriot interceptor is about 12 million.
Yeah.
They fire one of those, they have wasted an enormous amount of money to try to stop that threat. And the last thing you should be doing if you are trying to defend against something like a Shahed or these slow, cheap kamikaze drones is shooting expensive Patriot or David's Arrow systems at them. What you should be doing is taking a leaf out of the Ukrainians' book. And one of the answers as to why the Gulf states in the United States are having trouble in dealing with these drones is that apparently they haven't learned the lessons from Ukraine. The Ukrainians, they don't fire interceptor missiles at Shahed drones. They have a layered defense system. Firstly, they'll try to attack the launch sites with their own long-range fires. Then they'll engage in electronic warfare, which is quite effective against Shahed drones. It jams their GPS systems, it makes them go off target, occasionally makes them just fall out of the sky. And then they'll attempt to engage with a layer of other kinetic defenses. So you're talking guys in planes with machine guns. We've seen that time and time again. Guys in helicopters with machine guns, because these things go relatively slowly. You're talking things like Gepard, German anti-aircraft systems with 20mm cannon. You're talking interceptor drones. Now, these are launched by mobile air defense teams, and they go a fair bit faster, and they're a lot smaller. And the idea is that you have a pilot with goggles flying the interceptor drone, and he or she quite literally rams it into the Shahed. And then finally, you have guys on the back of pickup trucks with Dishkas or Browning heavy machine guns. And there to provide the final layer of defense. These kind of systems almost require looking back to the air defense systems that perhaps our grandfathers used in the Second World War, because they are slow, they fly relatively low, they are not going to be attempting very well to sort of dodge or weave like you might see out of a modern cruise hypersonic missile, and they don't have that parabolic arc that a ballistic missile has, where on the terminal phase it's going a number of times the speed of sound, which makes it so hard to intercept. Those threats are what you save the Patriots for, and it seems that the Gulf states and the United States and the rest of NATO, in fact, does not seem to have quite learned or hasn't quite ramped up the production of the systems to deal with this sort of retroactive but also new threat. So that's the mistake that they're making, which is why the Shaheds are in places getting through, because quantity has a quality all of its own. They're very cheap and you can launch them en masse. Ukraine regularly has nights where upwards of 500 Shaheds, or the Russians call them Gerans, is their own design, drones are launched in waves at major cities across the country. And they save their Patriots, which are a very precious resource for Ukraine, for the Iskanders and the Zircons, the ballistic and cruise missiles. They're not using them for them. So this is really what the Americans and the Israelis and the Gulf states are not quite doing correctly.
All right, so Theo, it was actually the Ukrainians are experts there because they're faced to counter the Shahed drones. How long did it take them to become an expert in countering these drones?
Well, the first few months when the Shaheds came in, they were trying to work out what they could do. It was quite difficult, but bear in mind, those months ago, the Shaheds weren't as advanced as the Gerans that we're seeing now. So it's a constant cat and mouse game between, and this is something throughout warfare. You improve an armament, therefore they try to improve the armor to defeat that armament. And this is constant. So if you stay in a city like Kyiv, you can have months where air attacks are relatively light because the air defenses are working very well. Then the Russians might change something up, and then they get a lot more serious, and then the Ukrainians are able to develop a countermeasure to that. So it did take the Ukrainians some time, but especially in the Russia-Ukrainian war, it is such a constant, it's very much a technological war, and it's such a constant battle to try to stay ahead in that technological competition. And the Ukrainians generally do a bit better on that front, whereas the Russians, of course, they do better in terms of materiel.
But it did take them quite a bit of time to become experts. And do you think before we come into the countermeasures, like the Israelis are reporting the Lucas drone, could you clarify if the Lucas drones are being used by the Ukrainians or not?
Sorry, I had an unexpected call. I do not know if the Lucas drones are being used by the Ukrainians. The Ukrainians are developing their own systems. So we see things like the Flamingo. Now, the Flamingo sits partway between a cruise missile and a drone. Although these kind of drones, like the Shaheds, like the Lucas, they're basically, it's a bit odd to call them drones. They're not really drones in the way a quadcopter drone is, where it's piloted manually throughout most of its flight time, or at least most of the time there are AI systems. It is a low-tech cruise missile. That is the best way to think about these things. A propeller-driven cruise missile. Now, I don't know if the Ukrainians are using Lucas systems. They probably, and they do develop their own systems. The Ukraine manufactures 85% of its own drone systems. So, and of course, American influxes of technology that tap's been very much reduced since Trump came to power.
All right, yeah, fair enough. But coming to the active war theater over here, Theo, there has been a development, escalation, very clear escalation, regional escalation of this war. And we were thinking that if not we, but we were discussing continuously, and that was definitely the American design, that the war would be over in, let's say, 72 hours, maybe. Like they were thinking that this operation would be just like Venezuela. And
the 3-day special military operation. Yeah, a 3-day special military operation.
Now they're saying few weeks, but the goals are changing. And obviously plans are the first casualty of war. So the plans have become a casualty. Where do you see this conflict heading now under the circumstances? And we know the headlines all around. We know the mathematics. We've just discussed it. The Shahed drone, why we're discussing it, that the Shahed drone versus a 4 million interceptor missile, which are already shot. And President Trump is going to have a meeting with the defense production majors in the US day after tomorrow, not today, for enhancing the manufacturing capability, which is only 5 to 6 missiles, as per the Secretary of State of the US, Marco Rubio. And Iranians, they're producing 100 missiles. And so far, clearly, it is visible that the Iranian and the Israeli attack have been unable to neutralize the ballistic missile capability and the Shahed drone strike capability of Iran. And there are no signs of regime change. In fact, the attack has galvanized the people in Iran in support of the regime. So there is no regime change in sight. So what do you think? Where are we heading?
I mean, I don't know if it's galvanized the people of Iran in support of the regime. Bear in mind that the regime has recently, but a month ago, massacred a few thousand of them. However, what it has done is galvanized those in Iran who already supported the regime, who I wouldn't say the majority of the people. And this is the essential question, isn't it? What was the plan? So you've killed the king. The Ayatollah is dead. What next?
Yeah, all right. You killed the king.
Right.
They've got layers.
They don't seem to have had an answer to that question.
Yeah, Ayatollah went in to die. Theo, that's the problem. Yeah. Ayatollah went in to die. He wanted to die. He wanted to be martyred. It was all per design. He knew he was going to die. And what you don't realize is that you've killed their pope. What if somebody kills the Pope? Do you think the entire Christian world would not galvanized? Would they not be galvanized? That's what you've done. You've galvanized them.
I must take some issue with the term "you." Obviously, I mean, this action is incredibly reckless on the part of the United States. Khamenei did wish for a conflict. I don't think he necessarily wished to die in that way, and having his entire command staff and most of the top echelons of the leadership killed in the same moment. And bear in mind, when we were first talking about this, and I presented the very early Israeli reports that they thought they killed him, we thought, oh, maybe the Chinese had warned him and he'd gotten out, but that clearly wasn't the case. And what has happened, I mean, obviously, the regime had a plan for this. They had a plan for the assassination of Khamenei, or even if he were to just keel over from a heart attack or a stroke. I mean, this is something that every nation has to have in case, the leader keels over. But what is clear is that this is not going to be a Venezuela situation, which Trump is quoted as saying he would have liked, where you get Darcy Rodriguez, who is, well, not a friend of the United States by any means, more compliant to the United States' increasingly imperialistic demands in South America. This is not going to happen in Iran, I think. I think that in the short term, over the next few weeks, we're going to see continued back and forth, continued attacks. And I think that diverging paths are evident in the medium and long term. Either the Iranian efforts to push a wedge between the United States and Middle Eastern partners, the Gulf states, Saudi, etc., succeed. They show that these nations are unable, that America is unable to really defend these nations, or these nations band together more than they had before and offer a bit of a united front to Iran. There's also a possibility that they conduct their own strikes upon Iran, whose air defenses have been significantly attrited by the 12-day war, and then this conflict by US and Israeli air power. One dangerous proposition, rumor that is floating around, is the idea of American boots on the ground. And there is that, you brought up the escalatory ladder, very easy to step up, very difficult to step back down. And this is something that I think Trump, in his perhaps his hubris after Venezuela, and that's the mistake I believe he may have made here. As I said earlier, you've killed the king. What next? And I don't think there is a well thought out, gamed, well planned scenario that the Americans have had going into this. I mean, take another mistake, Iraq, right? The Americans had gamed out Iraq repeatedly, and then they invaded Afghanistan. They saw how cheap it was, and they threw out the plan. And I forget who said it. I think it was a British general, but don't quite, maybe incorrect on this, that the plan for the post-invasion, the post-war situation in Iraq could have been written on the back of a post-it note. And I don't think the plan for the post-attack on Iran could have been written on a postage stamp.
Well, Theo, once the Secretary of State of the US says that, well, Israel went ahead and we would have faced the retaliation, so we had to go in. Of course, he retracted that statement the very next day, but he did make that statement. It is on record. So obviously there was a lack of planning, definitely. And otherwise, even if there was a plan, the plan became the first casualty. Plan is always the first casualty in war. And the plan did become a casualty in this war. Fine. So what's the next plan, since Europe is not on board in this war? Quite visibly, Keir Starmer says that we cannot support regime change cannot be done from the skies. So obviously, again, your point, the boots on ground need to be deployed. In the UK, it's very clear. Ed Davies says that's an illegal war. We cannot go into it. So the questions of legalities there. Spanish are very ferocious there. President Trump said that we don't need their permission to land our planes. We don't need to, but we don't need their permission. So they're also showing quite an aggressive mood in the Spanish parliament. At the same time, the Europeans are divided. They did not sign up for this war. It's quite obvious. And nobody is on board other than, not even Americans are on board. In fact, if you look at the American
the polling is pretty clear that Americans are not on board with this.
Yeah.
And
Trump. So once please continue. Please continue.
Trump's audacity and his rage against Europe, against Spain and the United Kingdom for not backing this conflict, mere months after threatening to invade Greenland, for God's sake, after constantly undermining his allies, supporting divisive, chaos-bringing ultranationalist parties across Europe, meddling in domestic internal affairs, and cutting off the tap of aid to the conflict that Europe really is very, very concerned about, because it's an existential crisis, the conflict in Ukraine, to then come out and say, why aren't you supporting me? It's what we could expect from Trump. It's the height of mindless narcissism.
The uncertainty of this regime, of this government, of this administration.
Yeah. And I can see why Europe doesn't want to be involved. And while I feel like it almost has to be said by somebody with my general position, I would support the end of the Iranian regime and the freedom of the Iranian people, but that is something that cannot be done from the air. And doing it like this, doing something like this, is so reckless. I think
so coming back to what you just said, that doing something like this cannot be done from the air. So you need boots on ground, and the plan for the boots on ground, Theo, is that they're arming the Kurdish. And as per American assessment itself, the Kurds won't be interested in going after Tehran after being armed. They'll go after Turkey and Syria and Iraq, and Iran may be, but it's highly unlikely that they'll go after Tehran. So do you think this policy of arming the Kurds as a proxy to become the boots on ground and supporting them from the air, do you think that's going to work?
And I feel how many times have the Kurds been burned by the Americans after getting arms and training to back us in this one thing, and we'll help you get a free Kurdistan. Do I think it's a mistake? Yes. And if they want boots on the ground, and this is a country of 90 million people, the Peshmerga aren't going to ensure the fall of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard and regime change for in this kind of country on their own. And perhaps they're trying to mirror, the relationship with the Northern Alliance at the start of Afghanistan. That the Northern Alliance did a lot of the fighting on the ground to kick the Taliban out, supported by US special forces and air power. Do I think that that can be mirrored in a country like Iran? No, I do not. I do not believe that would work. And if they want regime change, then there's only one way to achieve that. And it is clear, I think, that the American public do not have the appetite, bearing in mind that part of the reason Trump won was no more foreign wars. And yet he has engaged in foreign conflict time and time and time again. And we are not even halfway through his administration.
But there is a midterm coming up. How do you think this war is going to affect the midterm?
I think Trump wanted a short, victorious war. The one he conducted in Venezuela didn't see the spike in polls. Bear in mind, Trump is an avid, ravenous poll watcher. It didn't see the spike in polls that he'd hoped for. And going in for a short, victorious war can really shore up any sort of regime. I mean, this is an excellent example of this is the Falklands, where the Argentinian junta went to take Las Malvinas from the British. They experienced a huge spike in public support after that, and the British went and took it back. And then after that, Margaret Thatcher won a landslide election. And you can see how it went badly for the Argentinians, good for the British. If you want an example of it going very, very badly, then look to 1905, the Russo-Japanese War, or the start of the 3-day special military operation in Russia, by Russia in Ukraine. Let's call it the illegal imperialist invasion. Not going well.
Well, just 1 in 4 Americans say that they back U.S. strikes on Iran. Reuters reported the Ipsos poll. So, as you said, that the President Trump is very much interested, and he looks at the polls. So, the polls are not looking good for him. Any final words, Theo, before we call it off?
Very easy to start a war, often very difficult to end it.
Well, that's true, actually. And I would say never underestimate your enemy in this case in particular. And you always need to know what you're up against, because you are not up against some material, material goals, or you're not up against Venezuela. You're up against the theology. And at the end of the day, an ideology. And you have, sanctioned Iran so much that they don't have any option. What the Iranian perspective in this particular case is that, listen, we don't have to, all right, you're killing us, no doubt about it. We are taking the hits, like this reported that told today by country. You can see that Iran is taking the actual hit in this war. It's quite obvious. And these are civilian deaths, almost 800 in Iran. But these guys, they've got nowhere to go and they've got no other option. They're cornered and they have got no other option but to fight back. Whereas rest all the countries in this ladder, may it be Israel, United States, Lebanon, Bahrain, Kuwait, not Lebanon, but mostly most of the Gulf countries and the United States partners, they've got options to go away, flood. And once you've got option, you don't stand and fight. And well, Iranians don't have that kind of an option or luxury to leave. So only option for them is to fight back. And then selection of the target. You thought you're killing a political leadership? Well, that's not political leadership. That's religious leadership. The second most important man in the Shia faith, Shia Muslim faith. You've killed him, assassinated him. You only galvanized them. This is being acknowledged by the American media as well. Try to understand. Scott Ritter said it. That it's like.
Although I'm not Scott.
Of course.
Not somebody I put much credence behind, given his criminal record. But
so the second guy, he was talking to George Galloway. So while talking to George Galloway, and I've been talking to George Galloway, in many programs. But while talking to George Galloway, Scott Ritter brought out this point, which I think does play with the psychology of not only the Iranian people but the wider Muslim world. That you went ahead and you killed their Pope. That's how it looks like, and now expecting them to not fight back would be naive. I think, well, there wasn't any plan in place to counter the situation, as it is a fluid situation, so we will not go any further. But we did discuss that how this 21st century war is changing the strategy, the tactics at various levels. And certain people would say, Theo, my final question, that the United States and its allies, maybe United States itself, with this
just the United States.
just the United States, with this hegemonic army, with the massive army, very bulky force, is not ready to fight the 21st century warfare, which is very agile, very different. It's not Second World War anymore. What do you have to say to that?
Big powers lose wars, and they do it all the time. Russia is losing in Ukraine. Perhaps tell Mr. Ritter and Mr. Galloway that. The United States lost in Vietnam, in Afghanistan. Russia, or the Soviet Union, lost in Afghanistan. It is a rhyme throughout history that big powers lose wars against small nations. And I don't know how this one is going to go. I think it very much depends on the decisions over the next few weeks. But I think that this will be viewed as a significant strategic blunder on the part of the United States and Israel. And I worry that the main people who will be paying for this blunder will be the people of Iran, who I think, from those I've spoken to, yearn to be a different sort of country.
Just a supplementary question to this final question. Do you think there's a risk of escalation at the nuclear level for this war? Because they've tried everything else, and there are reports that Iran is also prepared for that. So do you think there's a risk of escalation to the nuclear ladder?
And Iran doesn't have nuclear weapons. It has some fissile material.
We don't know that. We don't know that. We don't know that. Officially, Israel also don't have the nuclear weapons.
Yeah, but I mean, come now.
Well, you never know.
Do I think that this is that this will escalate to nuclear? No. The nuclear option, I mean, it's called the nuclear option.
Yeah.
Is the taboo remains incredibly strong. And in a war such as this, for the United States, what do they gain from nuking a city? For Israel, what do they gain from dropping city busters? Nothing. And if Iran has them, what do they gain from nuking Tel Aviv. Nothing. Everybody dies.
Yeah,
that's the problem with nuclear weapons.
It's a mad scenario, mutually assured destruction scenario. Yeah, we hope sense prevail then, Theo. That's our prayers. Obviously, nobody wants that. We don't want that. And obviously, peace is the logical way forward. And somebody needs to strike a deal here, maybe because it's not going the way you wanted us to believe that it would go. And ultimately, the entire world is going to pay the price of the closure of the Strait of Hormuz. I mean, right now, obviously, you might be thinking, oh, don't worry about it. I mean, it's been only 5 days. It's been a week, but another week and the closure of Strait of Hormuz, and you're going to feel the heat of the inflation in the UK and Europe. We're already feeling that, but then you're going to feel it. Really, it's going to punch you quite hard. So we want that sense should prevail, and we want that peace should be the priority over here. And I'm sure the Gulf countries also want that. And let's hope that the logical way is followed through. Thank you so very much, Theo. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much, Adil.
Bye-bye.